All right, now that we're here, moving on, let's talk about how to navigate through the stage. So I have this document. There's a little drawing here of a cute little squid. I want to zoom in on this character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this tool here. It's called the zoom tool. On mine, it's about 3/4 the way down. It looks like a little magnifying glass. I'm going to click on it. And what this is going to do is it's going to magnify or zoom into my composition. So I click, I can zoom in. Every time I click, I'm zooming in. If you want to zoom out, there's a couple ways to do that or demagnify. You can choose in my tool options down here at the bottom. There is a little reduce or demagnify button. You can do it that way. Another way to do it is if you do have the enlarge or the zoom in, if you hold down the option or the alt key on your keyboard, you can see that turns into a little minus sign here, and that would also allow me to zoom in and out. Okay. Another way to do it is there's actually a zoom feature in the upper right-hand corner here. So if you click, you can see I can do different sort of preset magnifications. So 25%, 50%, 75%. If you want, you can just type in a number. So I don't know. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I want to put in 117. Okay, that's 117%. You can set it to fit in the window. So that means no matter, it'll kind of resize itself depending on how big your stage is, automatic. So it kind of automatically will reset if you want to do that. I kind of always like that one. Another way to do it, because why not learn 10 different ways to do the same thing, is you can go under zoom in and zoom out using the menus. Or another way to do it, which is there's keyboard shortcuts, which is how a lot of professionals like to do it, which is the command or the control button. And it's plus and minus. The plus and minus are the keys to the left of the delete or the backspace key. So control plus zooms in, control minus zooms out. Okay. This is a drawing program and it's a design program. So, a lot of times you guys might be used to, using drawing programs like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, or using components. So let's just talk about some things we can do. Let's say I want to add rulers to my composition here. The way I can do that is by going under the view and then rulers. This gives me rulers, which shows the pixel width of my horizontal and vertical. Once you have these rulers, you can actually now create what are called guidelines. Guidelines are lines that are meant to guide you. They are not something that actually exports. They're just there to sort of to be in the program. So if I click and drag, you can see I created this light blue guideline here. This is my vertical guideline. I can create, or sorry, horizontal guideline. I can create a vertical one by clicking and dragging here. Okay. At any point, you can always click and move your guidelines. If you want to remove them, just click and drag them all the way back into the ruler. That should delete them. Another way to do it is to play around with settings through your guidelines is go under view guides. You can actually lock your guides, which means you can't move them. If you want to unlock them, just click it back off so that the little check mark isn't there. If you want to temporarily turn your guides off, maybe we just want to, if you have a lot of guides, it can look kind of ugly and you want to show someone, you don't want people thinking that the blue lines are part of the scene. So you can just turn those off and bring those back if you need to. Oops, that's the grid, which we'll talk about. So you can bring those back and you can also just clear them, which means getting rid of all of them. We also have a grid. Having a grid is kind of like having graph paper. So if you want to be very specific, you can have this grid. You can turn it on and off through the grid options. If you want to edit the grid, you can do that too. That's going to open up a little menu like this. So you can change the color if you really want of the grid lines. That makes you happy. Maybe I want red. You can also change how big or how many pixels there are till the next grid line. So this is horizontal. So right now it's 10 pixels between each vertical grid line here. So maybe I want it a little more, like 50. So now it's like there's a bigger distance. And I could do the same for the vertical too. Okay. So grids are useful. People, like to use them as, once again, guidelines. You can also have things when you move them snap to the grid. So that's another reason why you may want to edit the grid. I'm going to turn that off. All right, let's talk about making a new project. Make a new project in Adobe Animate. I'm going to go to File and then New. That's going to open up a little dialog box like this. There's a lot of stuff going on here. To be honest, we don't really need most of it. We really just kind of need this area here, but hey. So let's talk about what's going on here. These are presets of sizes. These are some sample files that have some animation already in it. You don't want to use that. These again are kind of categories, and then you can see there's some presets here. Really, what we want to do is make our own document. So this is going to be our dimensions. The dimensions are the final output size. There's no quote unquote right or wrong dimensions, but there are some sort of standard dimensions. So for instance, let's say you wanted to have HD format for television. Okay. HD format would be 1280 by 720. That is one HD format. There is also 1920 by 1080. Both of those technically count as HD. So if I was setting up my animation and I wanted it to be HD, which is what this is, you can see it gives me that number. Here's full HD. I guess that's the official term, is full HD. There's also 4K. 4K is a newer output format. 4K, the K is 4,000 what? Well, 4,000 pixels. So it's not technically 4,000 pixels, but it's close enough. And 4K sounds cooler than 3,840, So 4K in this case is 3,840 pixels by 2160. Keep in mind that the larger your composition, the bigger your output file will be. Okay. So just be aware of that. It's going to just take up more file space when you output a video. At this level, it's probably not that big of a deal since we're not going to be doing extremely big or extremely, long animations or anything like that, but just something to be aware of. It's also 3,000 is a lot. Your computer may not have a resolution that big, so then you're always kind of zooming in and out. So, at this level, I would say probably HD, 1280 by 720 is probably fine for now. But it's something to be aware of when you're setting your dimensions. And you can also have dimensions that are not these numbers. You can type in any dimension you want. Just be aware that these are non-standardized formats, and that if you tried to put it on television, it would have to, resize it, and that can cause some distortion and that kind of stuff, which we don't necessarily want. The other thing that's important here is the frame rate. Frame rate is how many frames, how many frames are there per second? Okay. So because this is 2D animation, I'm assuming most people know what a frame is. A frame is a single drawing. the way I like to think of it is a flip book. Okay, let me just look up a flip book here on. Let's see if I'm going to open this flip book here. This is how I always kind of explain two-dimensional animation. Is think of it like a flip book. You know, most of us, I'm sure, made flip books as a kid. So it's like you start with a drawing, right? A single card and a drawing on it, right? That's so each one of these is a card that each card is a frame. Okay. Now you get a bunch of frames together and then you play them back. Okay. How do you play them back? Well, in this case, they're literally flipping them, hence the term flip book. So his finger is, moving side to side. That's causing the frames to play back. Okay. So the frame rate in this case is how many frames or how many drawings are being played per second. Okay. So for instance, right now, oops. This is sort of the standard, he's doing it this way, right? But let's say he flips slower. I'm going to do that by using just to play it back at a slower speed. Now, when he plays it, see how it's going slower by changing the playback speed? Like it's still the same number of frames, but they're playing back slower, or I can play it back faster. Okay. So your frame rate is really how fast you're playing back your animation. Okay. Like with dimensions, there really isn't a quote unquote like right or wrong frame rate per se, but there's sort of a standardized frame rate. Okay. So what are standard frame rates? Well, if you're doing film, traditional film, the frame rate is 24 frames per second. FPS, frames per second. Meaning for every 1 second of animation that you see on a screen, there are 12 pictures or 12 frames. For TV, at least in the US, that is actually a 30 frame rate. Okay, 30 frames per second, meaning that you would need 30 frames to create 1 second of animation instead of 24. So now you have to draw, or you have to have 6 extra frames to create the same amount of animation. It does mean, though, that you have more frames, which typically means that your animation will look a little smoother. In Europe, they use what is called the PAL system, and theirs uses a slightly different frame rate. It is 25 frames per second. So really, it depends, so these are sort of standard frame rates. 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 25 frames a second. Once again, it depends on what your output is. If you're outputting your animation to play for US television, you'd want to make your animation 30 frames a second. If it was set for Europe, you'd want to make it 25. For film, 24. For now, we'll just do 24. We can always speed it up a little bit, which is not the end of the world at our rate here, but it's not a good practice. You know, so we're going to set this to 24 frames per second. You can always go back and change this frame rate later, and I'll, show you how to do that in a second. The other thing here is what's called platform. At this point, you don't have to worry about this. Just set it to ActionScript 3. I'm not going to really get into this in this course. You can add programming in Adobe Animate, but that's not really a feature we're going to take advantage of in this course. Okay. Then I'm going to hit create. This is my composition. Let's say I wanted to make changes to it. So right now I'm clicking on my stage. Over here in my properties panel, you can see document settings, and you can see this is the stage color. I can switch the color of that if I want to. This is my frame rate. You can see it's set to 24. If I want to change that, I could literally just type in a new number, like 30, and that would change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. This is also my dimensions or my sizes. It's 1280 by 720. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I want to upgrade this to full HD, which is 1920 by 1080, 1920 by 1080. And you can see that my canvas literally got bigger. Okay. So you can click and literally reset the dimensions and the frame rate if you want to. Another way to do this is going under Modify Document. This is kind of a more official way of doing it. You can see here, it pulls open this panel here, and you can see this is my dimensions. I can use this to reset the size. So I'm going to set this back 1280 by 720. You can switch the color here too, and you can switch the frame rate. If I hit OK, that's going to save all my changes here. You can see it all updated. Okay. So I want you guys to try that out. That's exercise 1, 2, and 3. Try navigating, use the zoom tool and such, and the keyboard shortcuts. Add, make sure you can add grids and guides. Make sure you can set up your own document. Okay.